Welcome. This video we are going to be doing open focus meditation. This meditation was developed by the late great Fehmi, who was the godfather of Biofeedback. So I invite you to relax, sit back in your chair or lay down and lower your eyes. Just follow my voice. I want you to imagine the feeling of the space inside your nose. The feeling as the air moves in and the air moves out. The space that is occupied. Can you imagine the space of each eyeball as they drop down into the head? And the feeling of that space, deeper and deeper as the eyes drop down. Can you imagine the space of each ear, the whole circumference of the ear lobe, the tragus that touches the face, and the feeling of that space your ears occupy? Now, can you imagine the space between each ear and all the feeling of the space that's occupying through the head, inner ear, all that feeling of that space? Can you imagine the space of each lip, the upper lip and the lower lip at the same time? The kissing space and the space that they occupy. Can you imagine the space from the tip of your chin to the back of the brainstem where your head meets the neck? All the feeling of that space. And can you imagine the space of the top of your head all the way to the base of your neck and the whole head, the feeling of that space? The head is surrounded by space, penetrated by space, floating in space. Can you imagine the space of each thumb? The base of the thumb knuckle, the thumbnail, the thumbprint, all of the feeling of that space. Can you imagine the feeling of the space of the 4 other fingers? The pointer, the middle finger, the ring finger, the baby finger, all the feeling of that space. Can you imagine all 5 fingers at the same time, the feeling of the space between each finger and all the space that's occupying? Your hands are surrounded by space, penetrated by space, floating in space. The nucleus is 700,000 times smaller in an atom than the exterior. It's like the size of a basketball to the moon. We are all filled with space. Imagine the arms just floating in space and the feeling of that space. The arms, the hands, the head, floating in space, surrounded by space, penetrated by space. Can you feel now the whole trunk of the body, from the backbone to the front of the body, the sternum, the breastbone, all of the trunk and the feeling of the space that it's occupying? Can you feel the space of each big toe and the space it's occupying? Can you imagine all of the toes and the space between the toes and the feeling of the space they're occupying? The whole foot is floating in space, penetrated by space, surrounded by space. Imagine the legs, the lower leg, the upper leg, all floating in space. Can you feel that space? Can you feel the entire circumference of your skin everywhere, the surface of it, and the space that it occupies? Can you feel it dissolve, moving the energy outward, expanding the space and the feeling from the right side of the body to the nearest wall, the feeling of the space on the left side of the body to the nearest wall, the feeling of the space above the body to the ceiling. Can you imagine that space and the feeling of it as you expand outward to the treetops, out into the atmosphere of the planet, further and further out as you expand into the solar system, feeling the warmth of the sun on your left cheek and the coolness of the moon on your right, expanding out further and further past the 4 moons of Jupiter, the rings of Saturn, out into the Milky Way, passing the middle of the Milky Way as you expand the feeling of that space out into the billions of galaxies, further and further out into infinity.